The first time I suspected something was wrong, I was elbow deep in someone else's shoulder joint, trying to coax a frozen rotator cuff back into polite conversation with the rest of the body. And my phone buzzed with a text from my wife that said, "We need to talk. It's good news." I want you to hold that phrase for a second. It's good news. Because in my experience, 11 years of marriage, 14 years as a physical therapist, and roughly 4 decades of being a person who pays attention, those 4 words almost never mean what they claim to. But I'm getting ahead of myself. That's a habit of mine, one my ex-wife would tell you she found both charming and insufferable, depending on the day of the week and her general proximity to a glass of wine. I'll try to tell this story the way it actually happened, which means I have to start not with that text, not even with the day I filed for divorce, but with a Tuesday afternoon in February when a woman named Dr. Renata Ose came into my clinic with a frozen shoulder and an incidental piece of information that would, over the next 6 weeks, quietly detonate my understanding of the previous 8 months of my life. The thing about a truth that arrives sideways is that you don't recognize it as a truth. You recognize it as a conversation, a small, forgettable, routine moment between a patient and her physical therapist during a passive range of motion assessment. You file it somewhere in the back of your brain under interesting and you move on, because you have 4 more patients and a mountain of insurance paperwork. And the idea that this particular detail is a grenade with the pin already pulled, that doesn't occur to you. Not yet. I want to tell you exactly how it felt when the pin finally registered. But first, I need you to understand what the months before that Tuesday had looked like. Because this isn't just a story about a forged ultrasound. It's a story about 2 people who had stopped being honest with each other so gradually, so naturally, that by the time the real lies started, neither of us had any calibration left for what honesty even sounded like. Her name is Claudia. I'm going to call her Claudia because that is her name, and because she is a full human being and not a cartoon villain, and because one of the things I've learned from working in a field that deals with bodies in pain is that everyone has a before story that explains, even if it doesn't excuse, the after story. Claudia's before story matters. I'll tell it the right way when we get there. We met in 2010 at a mutual friend's housewarming party in the uptown neighborhood of Minneapolis. She was 31. I was 32. She laughed at something I said about the cheese selection. I had made an extremely niche joke about the structural integrity of brie, and something about the specificity of her reaction convinced me that this was a person who noticed things. I was right about that. I was just wrong about what she noticed and why. We were married by 2013. By 2015, we had a 1-bedroom condo near Lake of the Isles that we eventually converted into a 2-bedroom when we thought we were about to need it. The need never materialized. I'm going to be clinical about this because it's easier. We had difficulty conceiving. 3 years of difficulty. The specific kind that wears a marriage down not in dramatic arguments, but in small silences, in the way 2 people can sit at the same kitchen table every morning and slowly stop really looking at each other. We went to specialists. We did the things you do. And eventually, somewhere around year 7, we stopped doing the things and started doing something else, which was performing normalcy at each other across a distance that had become geographic in everything except the literal sense. I want to be fair here. I was not an innocent bystander in the deterioration of my marriage. I worked too much. Physical therapy is, by nature, an intimate profession. You are physically handling people. You are learning their histories. You are becoming fluent in their bodies. And I brought a lot of that careful attentiveness to the clinic, and not enough of it home. Claudia told me that. More than once. I heard her. I just didn't listen, which are not the same thing, a distinction that took me an embarrassingly long time to understand. By early 2023, We were roommates with a shared mortgage and a cat named Gerald who was, and remains, the only uncomplicated relationship in that apartment. I filed for divorce in April of that year. I want to be specific. I did not file in anger. I filed after 6 months of couples therapy that had the effect of two people politely documenting their incompatibility in a licensed professional's office. Our therapist, a very patient man named Dr. Halverson, who deserves a raise he will never get, said in our final session something that I've thought about many times since. You don't hate each other. That would be easier. You've just run out of road. He was right. We had run out of road. And so, in April, I sat down with a divorce attorney named Margaret Chen, whose office is on the 14th floor of a building on South 6th Street, downtown, and whose view of the Minneapolis skyline is genuinely spectacular in a way that feels morally incongruous with the business conducted there. And I began the process of legally disentangling one life from another. Claudia was served the papers on a Wednesday. She called me that night. The conversation was short and ugly and ended with her hanging up. I sat in the kitchen with Gerald on my lap and felt the specific exhaustion of someone who has been bracing for impact for so long that the collision itself is almost a relief. That was April. The text, "We need to talk. It's good news," came in July. I want you to notice the gap. I want you to hold it, because the shape of those 3 months is important, and we'll come back to it. She asked to meet at a coffee shop in St. Paul, a place called Cafe Astoria that she had always liked, and I had always found slightly too precious but had never said so because we were, by then, well past the point of saying things like that. I drove across the river on a Thursday evening in mid-July. The Mississippi was high from the summer rains. I remember thinking that the city looked different from the bridge, cleaner, somehow, more geometric, and wondering if that was the city or if it was just me, looking at familiar things from the perspective of someone whose life was being reorganized. Claudia was already there when I arrived. She had ordered a tea she wasn't drinking. She looked, and I'm going to try to say this accurately without cruelty, like someone who had rehearsed a performance and was now second-guessing the blocking. Her hands were still in a way that Claudia's hands almost never were. She was a naturally gesticulative person. The stillness was notable. She told me she was pregnant. I will not pretend that my first reaction was sophisticated. My first reaction was a long, loud silence in the middle of a cafe where someone was playing a Norah Jones album at a volume calculated to suggest intimacy without achieving it. My second reaction was confusion, the specific kind that comes from receiving information that doesn't fit any of the existing files in your brain. My third reaction, arriving close behind the second, was the one I'm least proud of. I thought, is this mine? I'm putting that on the table because it's true, and because this story only works if I'm honest about what I was. How far along? I asked, because it was the only thing I could think of to say that wasn't either accusatory or devastatingly sad. 8 weeks, she said. I know how this looks. I know what you're thinking. Claudia. It's yours, she said. I haven't been with anyone else. I know we've been... She paused. She picked up the tea, put it down. I know we're not in a good place, but this is real. This happened. I drove home in a condition I can only describe as suspended. Not numb. Suspension is different from numbness. Numbness is the absence of feeling. Suspension is all the feelings holding perfectly still, because none of them knows what to do yet. I called Margaret Chen the next morning and told her to pause the proceedings. Here is where the parallel timeline starts. And I need you to pay attention, because this is important, and because most people, I included, only saw one side of it while it was happening. The timeline I was living, July to September. The divorce paused. Claudia and I in an awkward, cautious détente. Dinner twice a week, once at the apartment and once at a restaurant. in the careful way of two people who are not quite back together, but are no longer actively apart. She showed me an ultrasound image in late July. Blurry, grainy, that particular kind of monochrome that medical imaging has perfected, and pointed to a small white shape that she said was 8 weeks and 4 days of new life. She cried. I held her hand. Gerald sat on the arm of the couch and watched us with the detached assessment of a creature who has seen too much and expects nothing. I want to tell you what I felt in those weeks, honestly, because the feeling matters. I felt hope. Terrible, irresponsible, structurally unsound hope. The kind that builds on a cracked foundation because you have been standing in rubble for long enough that any structure looks like shelter. We had wanted this for so long. The trying, the failing, the grief of it. And here, now, impossibly, apparently, it was happening. I told myself that sometimes people figure it out. Sometimes the worst years are just the preamble. I told myself stories, which is another way of saying I was not paying nearly enough attention. The timeline I was not living, also July to September. The one happening just outside my field of vision, in conversations I wasn't part of and a friendship I didn't know had been leveraged. This is the timeline I'll have to reconstruct for you using things I learned later, some from Claudia herself, some from a source that will become apparent. In this timeline, a woman named Soo-Jin Park, a college friend of Claudia's, who had recently had a genuine pregnancy and who had, as people do, accumulated various pieces of medical documentation from that experience. In this timeline, a conversation between two friends, one of whom was desperate, and one of whom did not fully understand what was being asked. In this timeline, photographs taken without permission, documents studied, a template purchased from a website that I refuse to look up because the existence of such websites is a moral indictment I'm not prepared to fully unpack in this particular story. In this timeline, Claudia, alone, doing something meticulous and considered and devastating. She didn't just fake a pregnancy, she faked a future. Dr. Renata Osei arrived in my clinic for the first time on a Tuesday in early February, which means she arrived approximately 5 months after the events I just described, and approximately 6 weeks after the events I haven't described yet. She was 44 years old, an OB/GYN at a large hospital system in the metro area, and she had developed a classic case of adhesive capsulitis, frozen shoulder, in her right shoulder following a period of reduced activity after a minor surgery in the fall. She was referred by her primary care physician and arrived with the particular combination of medical literacy and personal frustration that characterizes healthcare professionals who become patients. They know what's wrong. They just can't fix it themselves, which is, depending on your personality, either humbling or infuriating. Renata was firmly in the infuriating camp. I liked her immediately. The thing about working with someone's body is that conversation fills the space. It has to. You're touching someone. You're asking them to do uncomfortable things. And silence under those conditions becomes clinical, in a way that doesn't serve the therapeutic relationship. So we talked. Over the first few sessions, I learned that she had 3 kids, a husband who was a structural engineer, an opinion about the Minneapolis park system that was extensive and largely correct, and a tendency to give medical advice to her friends that she claimed was casual, but was clearly not. It was in our 4th session, mid-February, a Thursday, the kind of Minneapolis February that feels like the city is personally trying to discourage habitation, that she mentioned during a passive external rotation stretch that I could tell she found slightly more uncomfortable than she was admitting, that she had recently had a strange conversation with an old acquaintance. She needed an OB/GYN recommendation, Renata said, her voice carrying the particular flatness of someone describing something mildly irritating. From, I don't know, 8 months ago. Said she was pregnant. I gave her a colleague's name. I made a neutral sound of acknowledgement, the kind you make when a patient is talking and you're focused on the joint but also listening, because listening is half the job. The weird thing, Renata continued, and here is the moment, here is the pin, is that I ran into Dr. Mehta, the colleague I recommended, at a CME conference a few weeks ago, and I mentioned the woman's name, and he had no record of her, no intake, nothing. He would have remembered. It's not a common name. I adjusted my grip. I moved the shoulder through another degree of rotation. Huh, I said. Then I find out, Renata said. And I only find this out because I asked around a little, because it was bothering me. The ultrasound images she was apparently showing people. My colleague thinks they look like a standard 8-week image that gets passed around in medical training. Stock image, basically. Textbook material. She paused. I don't know. It's probably nothing. People are strange. Yeah, I said. People are strange. The session continued. We did the stretching. We did the joint mobilizations. I wrote my notes. She scheduled her next appointment. She left. I sat in my office for 11 minutes without moving. I need to back up now because I left you with a gap. That 3-month one, April to July. And I also left you at November, which is when the other timeline I alluded to arrived at its destination. Let me fill the November piece first, because it's the one that explains why I was already in a certain kind of darkness by the time February arrived. In November, 4 months into the paused divorce proceedings, 4 months into the cautious detente, Claudia had what she described as a miscarriage. I want to be precise about my response to this, because the response matters more than I was able to understand at the time. I was sad. I was genuinely, deeply sad, in the way that you can be sad about something even when part of you has been quietly afraid of that thing, quietly suspicious of it. The grief was real. I held her while she cried. I canceled my clinic days for a week. I made food neither of us ate. Gerald, to his credit, stayed close in the way that cats sometimes do when the emotional temperature of a room demands it. I also felt something else, underneath the grief, and I buried it immediately because it was ugly and I didn't want to look at it. But I felt it. Relief. Tiny, shameful, barely articulable relief. Because some part of me, the part that had been paying attention even when I told it not to, had been holding its breath since July. I buried that feeling so successfully that I forgot it was there. And then I moved forward, because moving forward is what you do. The divorce proceedings resumed in December. Margaret Chen's office, 14th floor, spectacular, incongruous skyline. We went through it the right way, civil, methodical, unpleasant in the specific way of things that are necessary. By January, we had a draft agreement. By February, the same February that Dr. Renata Ose first walked into my clinic, we were 2 weeks from signing. And then Thursday happened, and the session ended, and I sat in my office for 11 minutes. Here's the thing about information that arrives sideways. You can't confront it directly, not at first, because the information isn't attached to a name, to a face, to a clear accusation. It's just a shape, an outline of something, and before you can do anything about it, you have to trace the outline carefully enough to see what it actually is. I traced it for 3 days. I am a physical therapist, not a detective, and I want to be clear that the following sequence of events was not elegant or cinematic. It was, in fact, the exact opposite. It was a series of small, quiet, slightly undignified investigations conducted by a man who was not sleeping properly, and who kept putting Gerald down because he needed to pace, and then picking him up again because pacing alone is somehow worse. Day 1. I thought about Renata's description and tried to locate a reason to dismiss it. I'm not being falsely modest here. This was my genuine first move. The mind wants to find the exit before it will agree to stay in the room. I catalogued. She might have misunderstood what Maida said. She might have the name wrong. The acquaintance she described might not be who I was thinking of. There were reasons to dismiss it. There were also reasons not to. I knew the name Soo Jin Park because Claudia had mentioned her in passing over the years. The way you mention old friends who live in the peripheral distance of your current life. I knew she'd had a baby. Claudia had mentioned it. I knew the timing. Sometime last summer, right around the time, day 2. I found, without specifically searching for it, Soo Jin Park's social media account. This is not surveillance. This is what you do when you're following a thread. She had posted her pregnancy throughout, documenting it the way people do now, publicly and with a particular kind of loving exhaustion. And there, in a post from June, before Claudia told me anything, before the coffee shop and the tea she didn't drink, there was an image, an ultrasound image. I am not a radiologist. I have some medical imaging literacy from my training, the modest kind that comes from years of reading MRI results and coordinating with orthopedic surgeons. I am not qualified to make a formal comparison, but I looked at that image for a long time, and then I thought about the image Claudia had shown me in late July, and the outline got sharper. Day 3. I made a call I've spent considerable time second-guessing. I called Soo Jin Park. I want to explain the second-guessing. She was not part of this story by choice. Whatever had happened, and I still wasn't certain what had happened, she was a peripheral figure, possibly a victim of something she didn't know was being done in her vicinity. Calling her meant pulling her into a situation she hadn't asked to enter, but I called, because I needed to know. She answered on the second ring. I introduced myself. I said I was Claudia's husband, estranged, technically, but the word felt odd. And I asked if they had been in contact recently. There was a pause. The quality of the pause told me something. I haven't really talked to Claudia in a while, she said carefully. Is everything okay? I'm not sure, I said. And then I asked her about the ultrasound. The pause this time was longer, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. Tighter, more careful. The voice of someone who has been quietly carrying a thing and is now being asked to put it down in front of a stranger. She said she needed to look at one, for comparison. She said she was having some imaging done and wanted to know what the standard format looked like, and could she borrow mine, just to look at. She kept a copy, I said. It wasn't a question. I gave her the benefit of the doubt. We've been friends a long time. A breath. Oh God, is she okay? I don't know yet, I said, and I meant it. I want to give Claudia the humanizing moment she deserves, because this is the part of the story that gets flattened in retellings and it shouldn't be. Before I confronted her, and I want to tell you about the confrontation, but we're not there yet. I sat with what I knew about why. Not justification, explanation. The before story. Claudia had wanted children with a force that I had understood intellectually, but had maybe underestimated experientially. This is my fallibility again. I felt the loss of our failed attempts as grief, but I think I processed it as an event that had ended. She was still living in it as an ongoing condition. And when the divorce became real, when the papers arrived, when the thing she had been calling a rough patch for 3 years revealed itself to be a conclusion, I think something in her calculus broke. She was 52 years old. I know how that sounds. I know you're calculating. But the pregnancy story wasn't irrational in the way a lie told for convenience is irrational. It was irrational in the way that desperate math is irrational. She had been told stories by the internet and by selective hope about late pregnancies, about unexpected chances. I think she built a scenario in her head in which this thing that she was doing was not a forgery, but a placeholder, a way to buy time for something real to possibly, improbably, happen. I don't think she's a monster. I think she was a person who had run out of road and refused to stop driving. That doesn't make it okay. I just want you to know that I understand it, which is different from forgiving it, which is different again from what I was actually feeling, which was a kind of slow, structural devastation that is hard to describe in real time. There is a question I asked in Act 3, in the long middle part of this story, that I told you I wouldn't answer until now. The question was about the gap, that 3-month gap, April to July. The divorce filed in April, the text in July. What happened in those 3 months? I know the answer now because Claudia told me, in the conversation I'm about to describe. Those 3 months were the planning phase. She had received the divorce papers. She had sat with them. She had made a decision. She had contacted Soo Jin on a pretext. She had spent 6 weeks constructing the fiction, testing it, making it as internally consistent as a person who was not a medical professional could make it. The ultrasound she showed me was Soo Jin's. The documents, the intake form from an OB/GYN, the prenatal vitamins prescription, the follow-up appointment card, were forged using a template she found online and printed at a FedEx office in Bloomington because she was afraid someone at her local print shop might recognize her. She had done all of that. She had then walked into a coffee shop in St. Paul on a July Thursday and told me it's good news and watched me believe her. And she had built a performance that lasted 4 months before it had to end. By the time I'm telling you this, Renata Osei's shoulder has improved significantly. She's at about 65% range of motion, which is good news. She is also completely unaware that the casual thing she said in mid-February changed the direction of my life. She mentioned a strange acquaintance. She noticed an inconsistency the way doctors notice things when they're being observed out of clinical context. She has no idea. I have chosen not to tell her, because pulling more people into this radius seems wrong, and because there is something strangely appropriate about the truth having arrived through that particular door. An OB/GYN's shoulder, and the small talk that fills the space. The confrontation happened on a Saturday in late February. Claudia opened the door of the apartment, still the apartment we'd shared, the 2-bedroom with the Lake of the Isles view that we'd converted in anticipation of a child that had never arrived, and looked at me with an expression that I can only describe as prepared. She had been expecting this, or something like this. People who build elaborate fictions often develop a hypervigilance about their perimeters. She'd been watching for signs. You know, she said. Not a question. Some of it, I said. Gerald appeared at her ankle with his usual editorial timing. We sat at the kitchen table. The same table where we had eaten breakfast for 11 years, where we had also conducted the slow, silent withdrawal that precedes a marriage ending. There was afternoon light on the wood. Minneapolis in February, when you actually get sun, is startling in its brightness, the way everything reflects off the snow in a way that has no warmth in it, just luminance. Tell me about the images, I said. She told me. Not immediately. First she tried a version where it was more ambiguous, where she had thought they were just talking about hypotheticals, where the line between borrowing and stealing was harder to locate than it actually was. I let her run that version, and then I said quietly, Soo Jin told me what you said to her. The comparison story. She stopped, and then she told me the real version. Why? I asked. Because I wasn't ready, she said. and she began to cry. Because we had been trying for 3 years and you were the one who stopped caring about it, and I was the one who still. She stopped. She pressed her hands flat on the table. Because I thought if I had more time, if we had more time. You would have had to keep lying indefinitely, I said. I know. And when it became impossible to maintain, I planned to tell you I miscarried, she said. Which I did. Eventually. That's not a miscarriage, Claudia. I know what it is, she said, and her voice broke on it in a way that I'm not sure I can adequately describe. It was the voice of someone saying something they have said to themselves many times, alone, in the quiet of an apartment they no longer shared with a husband. I know exactly what it is. I sat with that for a while. Gerald jumped onto the table, which he is not supposed to do, and neither of us moved to stop him. The thing I keep coming back to, I said eventually, is that you made my grief real. You understand that? 4 months. I was grieving something I thought we had lost. That grief was real. She nodded. And the grief I had before, I said. The years of trying. That grief was real too. And you took the shape of it and you... I stopped. You used it. She didn't say anything. Because there was nothing to say. We both knew that was the most accurate description of what had happened. The divorce was finalized in March. Margaret Chen's office, the skyline still spectacular and still morally incongruous. Claudia and I signed what needed to be signed. Our lawyers spoke in the clipped language of agreements concluded. I took the elevator down 14 floors and stood on South 6th Street in the cold, and looked at the city for a few minutes. It was one of those Minneapolis days when you can see the steam rising from the buildings, all that centralized heat fighting the outside air, and the skyline looks, from street level, like something industrial and indifferent, and also, if you're in the right mood, like something that has been standing through a lot of winters and will keep standing through more. I don't know if that's a metaphor. I'm a physical therapist. Metaphors are not my primary professional language. Gerald is still with me for the record. He adjusted to the new apartment, a 1-bedroom in the North Loop, close to the clinic, with the equanimity of a creature who understands that comfort is wherever the food bowl is. He is currently asleep on a radiator cover in the manner of a being who has made his peace with things. I have not made my peace with all the things. I want to be honest about that. What I keep thinking about, in the months since, and I am still in those months, I want to be clear. This is not a story I am telling from the far comfortable bank of resolution. Is a particular quality of the lie. Not its cruelty, which was real but which I think I can eventually metabolize. Not its desperation, which I understand even when I can't excuse it. But its precision. She didn't just tell me she was pregnant. She built a world in which the pregnancy was real. She had the images. She had the documents. She had the prenatal vitamins on the bathroom shelf. She had a due date. She had a story about which OB-GYN she was seeing and why she liked her. She had a preference for a name, which she shared with me once, over dinner at the kitchen table, with what appeared to be genuine nervousness. The kind of nervousness you have when you're telling someone something real. She didn't just fake a pregnancy, she faked a future. And here is where I am supposed to arrive at a lesson, and I want to be honest with you. I don't have one. Not a clean one. I have observations. I have the observation that intimacy is a form of intelligence, that you have to be profoundly fluent in another person to convince them of something that isn't true, and that Claudia's forgery was in some awful way a testament to how well she had learned me over 11 years. She knew what I would believe. She knew what I needed to see to believe it. She knew the exact weight of hope required to overcome my better judgment, and she applied it with precision. I have the observation that the body tells the truth before the mind agrees to. I think some part of me knew. Every one of those 4 months. I think the relief I felt in November, that shameful, buried relief, was not relief that the pregnancy was over. It was relief that the holding pattern was over, that some part of the performance had concluded. I suppressed that knowledge because I wanted to not know it, which is a privilege we grant ourselves constantly and should perhaps interrogate more often. I have the observation, which is perhaps the strangest and most difficult one, that the grief we had shared in the years of trying, the real grief, the accumulated grief of tests and procedures and negative results and quiet kitchen mornings, that grief was, in some awful way, the raw material she used. She knew the shape of what I wanted. She had wanted it too. And she weaponized that shared shape. Not out of malice, I think. Out of terror. Which is somehow both better and worse. Renata Ose's shoulder is at about 80% now. We have 3 or 4 sessions left, depending on how her home exercises progress and whether she follows through on them. She is, like most medical professionals, better at prescribing than complying, which I mentioned to her with the professional affection of someone who is not the least bit surprised. She doesn't know. She mentioned an odd acquaintance once. She has moved on. Her shoulder is the concern. I have not told her. I've thought about it. I've thought about what it would mean to say, that thing you said in February, the passing comment, the small professional observation, was the piece that completed a picture I'd been afraid to look at directly. You handed me a truth I wasn't sure I wanted to receive. I haven't said it because there's something important about the fact that it came the way it did. Sideways. Casual. With no weight assigned to it by the person delivering it. The truth came wearing nothing. No drama, no confrontation, no accusation. Just a doctor's shoulder and the conversation that fills the space when you're moving a body through discomfort. Maybe that's the closest thing to a lesson I can offer. That sometimes the most important things arrive while you're paying attention to something else. That the body, your patient's bodies, your own, has a way of telling the truth even when everyone around it is trying very hard not to. There is one more thing. About 6 weeks after the divorce was finalized, I was at my clinic on a late afternoon, the last patient gone, the light in the treatment rooms going gold and horizontal, the way spring light in Minneapolis does when it finally decides to commit. I was writing notes. Gerald was at home on the radiator. The building was mostly quiet. My phone rang. Unknown number. I answered because I thought it might be about a referral. It was Claudia. She said, "I just wanted to say I'm sorry. Not in a way that asks for anything back. Just, I'm sorry." I held the phone. "I know what I did," she said. "I know who I became. I didn't want to be that person. I want you to know that." I believed her. That's the thing. Even then, even knowing everything, I believed that she meant it. "Okay," I said. And then, "I hope you're all right, Claudia." I hung up. I sat for a while in the golden late light, in the chair I use when I'm not actively working with a patient, the one that looks out the window at a side street where nothing very interesting ever happens. A woman walked by with a stroller. A man in a high-visibility vest loaded something into a truck. The ordinary traffic of people living their lives in the gaps between significant events. I thought about the word future, and what it means to build one in someone else's mind, and what it means to have that building demolished, and whether the rubble looks different from the inside than from the outside. I didn't have an answer. I'm not sure there is one. What I have is this. The truth arrived in my clinic on a Tuesday afternoon in February, wearing a frozen shoulder and making conversation about a mutual acquaintance. It arrived without ceremony. It arrived while I was paying attention to something else. And now I know, and the knowing doesn't resolve the way you'd hope it would, doesn't close up clean and final like a file you can put away. It just stays with you, moving through your days, the way a body carries an old injury, not always painful, not always present, but there, in certain weather, when you move wrong, when the light is a particular kind of gold and you're sitting still, and you let yourself feel the full weight of what someone can build out of a shared grief and what it costs you when they take it apart. She faked the future. She did. I lived in it for 4 months hoping. And the terrible, true, irresolvable thing is this. I would give a great deal to know whether, somewhere in all that careful construction, the borrowed images, the forged documents, the precise performance of hope, there was also something she was trying to give me, and not only take. Whether the lie, at its core, was built on love, or whether I have become someone who needs it to have been, whether those two things are even different, whether I will ever fully know the answer, whether the question is the point,